Yeah, and please feel free to turn on your videos. It makes it friendly for me to see your faces in reaction. But if you can't, that's fine too. I'd love to see you guys. I have you on my right-hand side. So with that said, so I'm going to be reporting a little bit on the activity of this working group that was essentially started working together at the beginning of the year, more or less, around February or March. It's really entitled Climate Data and Prediction for Coastal Solutions. And because of the breadth of the type of work we're trying to do, we have 4 co-chairs. I'm one here included with my hat in Venice recently, but there are others, Sam Siddiqui at University of Connecticut, Maylin Pinsky at Rutgers University, Clarissa Anderson at the Southern California Coastal Ocean Observing System. And the idea of having these different co-chairs is really to have a diverse sort of portfolio of expertise in different aspects of the coastal climate challenge, let's call it this way, since this is a word that US CLIVAR used in their report. And it's good to see some old faces. Hi, Lynn, good to see you. So with that said, let me get started. So what are the main sort of timetables and deliverables for this working group? So we have identified 2 main tasks, and this is just a summary to remind people who may not be so aware. In our first task, really our goal is to co-design an actionable climate information and forecasts that are really targeted for equitable coastal solutions. So this means really understanding the landscape of what are really user needs, for coastal climate services at the coast, and possibly find ways in which the climate science community can engage in terms of delivering products that can be used actually by coastal communities or coastal decision makers. The second task, of course, is as we try to make climate projections on different timescales, we also want to explore more innovation in terms of downscaling climate information and forecasts with its uncertainties, and how that downscaling information, again, can be most useful, be communicated to decision makers. And then last, as a synthesis of task 1 and task 2 is really, we are hoping that this work could sort of put the foundation to advance maybe a US coastal climate prediction communities that is really focused on understanding the climate impacts at the coast. So with that said, I'd like to drill in a little bit more deep on what are specific deliverables for this working group. And here you can follow a little bit the color coding. The red is task 1, blue is task 2, and then the black is sort of the synthesis, or the if you like, the broader outreach of this work group. So the first, under task 1, really, what the working group has been doing a lot is trying to focus on understanding what are the user needs, and hopefully develop a report on really what are emerging climate services that are most needed according to both user needs and according also to what the science community can deliver. And so with that said, the label P1 here stands that our goal is to deliver sort of a white paper that I will discuss in a second in terms of audiences and so forth. But that's basically what the P stands for. These are products that are thought to be papers. Exactly the format is still under discussion. Following this first deliverable D1, our second goal is to really develop a shared roadmap for how to implement best practices and robust approaches like machine learning or dynamical approaches for downscaling climate information at the coast, and possibly share that across the community. There's a growing community of scientists working on this problem, on how to downscale climate information, especially at the coast, and different funding agencies have programs now that are funding proposals left and right. And so the idea is to really try to figure out exactly how these communities are going forward in trying to implement these downscaling techniques. And then moving more squarely in task 2, one of the ideas that we discussed that we wanted to explore is really how to improve equitable access. And so with the explosion of AI natural language models like ChatGPT and so forth, there's perhaps a possibility to think about what could a coastal climate AI chatbot be like in order for it to provide actually the climate information that we develop in ways that are really answering to the user needs. Essentially, people can interact with these bots maybe in their own language and get answers that are more directly sort of addressing the things that they're interested in. And so there are some platforms already out there, including one from Google Data Commons, that actually merge natural languages and data together to present both responses that are qualitative, but also maps and data that are quantitative. And so that's something that we'd like to explore, in the future as part of Task 2. And then to finalize, we definitely hope that in the process of this working group, we can develop a more kind of shared expert network of people working in coastal climate downscaling and prediction here in the US. And then the last deliverable for us, of course, is education and sharing. We will be starting probably next year a more public webinar series on these topics, especially on the downscaling. So with that said, today I really am reporting on our first deliverable, which is user needs. And so really what we've been focusing a lot right now is the discussion of what are these coastal climate services and what are the user needs. And so to inform this work, I think I ought to provide you with some background of how we decided to go forward about this. So the starting point for us was when the Office of Science and Technology sort of released a statement together with the Biden-Harris administration about the need for scientifically based usable information and products and enhanced knowledge and understanding about the impacts of climate change on potential decision and actions. Following this sort of directive, there was the establishment of something called the Fast Track Action Committee on Climate Services, which some of you may know of, some may not know of. But the objective of this Fast Track Action Committee is to advance the development of an operational framework for federal climate services that is consistent with legal mandates of a series of acts that were put out. And here, climate services, of course, is broader than just coastal, but we fit squarely within the coastal aspect of this particular initiative. And so this Fast Track Committee actually issued a report in March 2023. And so as a first step, the working group actually examined this report very closely. And to give you some background of how this report came into action, it really started back in 2021 with an executive order on tackling climate crisis at home and abroad. And this is what's referred to as Section 211D. Following this report, following this executive order, there was a group of people that was put together through the Office of Science and Technology and Policy, NOAA, and also FEMA, that issued a first sort of assessment that articulates a vision and some recommended actions for future decisions for federal climate services. And this is this report that came in 2021. And then in 2023, Fast Track put out this report, which we examined closely, that really tries to translate all these recommendations into actual actions. How do we actually make it happen? And so this particular Fast Track report presents a set of opportunity, challenges, and recommendations that are relevant to our working group and are informing essentially part of the deliverable that we're trying to do. So let me drill a little bit more in depth here. And let me just say that this Fast Track overarching recommendation is for the US Global Change Research Program, or USGCRP, to expand its research coordination role to provide national leadership in coordination and strategic planning of these climate services. And, excuse me. And so what are the opportunities that this report sort of outlines in terms of needs? One, of course, there's a big opportunity for technological advances. And these could be things like, for example, machine learning, downscaling approaches, and so forth. There are opportunities for advances in geospatial and cloud computing, opportunity for ongoing regional engagement. There's also opportunity to grow the non-federal landscape of groups that provide climate services. And then more importantly, there's also a recognition that really this is a time where we have to expand the community of people that are working in trying to develop climate services, including things that universities and research institutions. So this is sort of the opportunity landscape. There are also some important challenges that this report has put forward. The first one, which perhaps is very broad, is that there's still limits in our scientific knowledge that is necessary to deliver climate services. And there's also a challenge in really understanding how to align these services with the actual user needs. And so with that said, let me just dig a little bit more into what it means that we have these limits in scientific knowledges. So this is, I'm just going to read this because you're probably going to try to read it as well, so I make it easier for you. So the ability to provide useful climate data to decision makers is limited by gaps in scientific understanding, especially in predicting climate extremes events that cause significant economic losses. Advances in Earth system modeling and downscaling are ongoing, but challenges remain in making these predictions actionable. And this, I think, is really an important aspect. How do we make those predictions actionable? Also important is to connect the physical sciences to the behavioral, societal, economic, and cultural dimension of information usage. And I hope that for many of you who have worked in coastal areas or in climate, this is none of this should come as a surprise as being some of the limitations. As we move forward in terms of alignment to user needs, there's really a diverse needs of practitioners across different sectors, and the necessity of building trusted relationship to effectively use these tools, underscoring the importance of regional approaches and enhanced coordination to better meet local challenges and stakeholder needs. What this means also is that we may have a variety of tools and things that are being developed, but we also have the need for a human infrastructure that really serves as an access point to really understand how to put these tools into context and also utilize them appropriately together with the data. Tools here means both knowledge and data. Moving forward, the report has three broad-scale directives that we examine. One is the fact that the US Global Research Change Program is going to lead basically the implementation of this framework for climate services. There's going to be the establishment, which already happens, of a national climate service partnership. And most importantly, the goal here is to develop an operational definition and framework for what are climate services. I think we lost a whole bunch of people, or is it my... No, I just don't see them anymore, I guess. That's fine. Is that right, Alicia?
Still here.
Oh, everybody's good. Okay, very good.
Yeah, looks like we're good.
Okay, very good. Within these directives, there are 12 specific recommendations that we have identified that are really where our working group can contribute to. And so this is really guiding our work. And in particular, these are the three areas of work that our working group has identified to really satisfy these recommendations. The first one is really understanding coastal community needs for climate services. The second one, which is really reflective in task 1 and task 2, innovations in downscaling for coastal climate services. And then the third one is really trying to bridge research and application in coastal climate services. So with that said, these particular areas of work of our working group, especially the first one, addresses the first challenge, which is the alignment to user needs, whether the second two, the second task in our synthesis component really address these limits in scientific knowledge challenge. So how are we going about trying to advance the first understanding of coastal climate needs for climate services? Well, we have a very broad working group with 17 members that represent really different communities at the coast, from marine ecologists to physical climate scientists to people that work on observing systems. And so what we have been doing in these first months is we've been essentially advancing an informal seminar series among the working group members to really try to answer the question, what does climate service mean to you? What are the climate data needs that are most urgent to deliver coastal climate services that have been identified as clear needs from coastal communities? Most of the people in the working group have worked in research projects that are engaging with coastal communities. And so we all have had a direct experience with what we think are useful services for coastal communities. And what has emerged from this webinar series, which is still ongoing, not all members have spoken yet, is that there's a wide range of possible coastal climate services that are important. There's been an overemphasis, obviously, on flooding, services or data that are related to flooding, sea level rise, storms. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole bunch of ecosystem climate services that have been neglected and so forth. And so the working group is essentially already realizing that there's a big opportunity to make a case that we can learn from what people have done in terms of producing services, for example, for flooding and so forth, but actually apply that knowledge for other types of services that are neglected and for which there's really no infrastructure yet. With that said, the second part of this webinar series is going to really be about engaging external speakers. And so these sessions really will highlight successful projects and the role of boundary organization in enhancing climate services for these communities. And we have a draft of a first paper on coastal climate services, which we have put together, and it's going to be informed by all these all the data that we collect from the webinar. And the audiences for this paper that we are trying to target are four. The first one is the climate science research community at large. And the idea here is that we would like to be able to inform our fellow climate scientists, especially the younger generation, how to best engage in climate science at the coast that can actually have an impact, right? I'm a modeler, for example, and so when I started my coastal modeling, I thought, oh, of course, everybody wants to use my coastal model. But it turns out it's not actually the case, not at least in the way that I had envisioned. And so it's really important to educate our own community of how to actually contribute. The second one is the federal government and agency, including this fast track committee, trying to give them, if you guys want to develop a framework for climate services, here are some information that is potentially useful in shaping that the climate services of the coast. The other one is the boundary organizations, or basically all those nonprofits that are working in this space, which we feel would have great use in knowing what the climate science community can offer, broadly speaking. And then the last, of course, is the funders. Whoever is funding this type of work, they may want to have some sort of roadmap of what priorities we may have identified in this area. So with that said then, the timeline for completing this first task, we started in May of 2024. We had a whole bunch of webinars. We're hosting these webinars. Our first task is really understanding these coastal community needs for climate services. But right now we're in this phase of learning from the working group members' expertise. And you can see that the other phases involve first inviting speakers from boundary organizations to really landscape the existing knowledge and gaps. We also are trying to line up to speak with some of the representative of the US GRP, which is really one part of the federal government agency, to really understand how to best contribute to the fast track committee's objectives. And so we have reached out to Benjamin Preston, who is actually the co-chair of the fast track committee and at the Office of Science and Technology. And we're setting up a call with him to sort of go over and make sure that actually what we do is really has a direct plug-in in what they're trying to do with their own work. Following this phase, the next phase will be to bring also invited speaker from the climate science community at large to learn from existing projects that are currently engaging researchers in delivering real climate solutions. So we're talking about projects or research projects that are not just, oh, we're doing a downscaling exercise and we're going to have this output, but actually they're co-designing their downscaling with actual communities that want to use the downscale information. So those are the type of projects that we are trying to target. And then we'd like to set up a panel conversation in some sort of format with some funders to really see if we can provide some information to their research agendas and maybe understand if they have some specific gaps that we could fill. With that said, our long-term goal is for May of next year to maybe have a synthesis workshop on the findings of all these activities and then finalize our synthesis paper as well. So that's really the sort of a summary of where we are in our first deliverable. Our start has been a little bit rocky because, putting together 17 people, as you can imagine, it's not easy. And so we've had some trouble trying to find times to meet together, but we're progressing. I also should say that this has been very much a transdisciplinary sort of work where, although we have a general objective, the hows and to proceed, and what I just illustrated today was actually the output of a lot of conversations early in the first meetings. We weren't quite sure how to structure our work, so this is sort of also part of the output of the committee of this working group under this deliverable. And so this is it for now, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
That was great, Manu. Thank you. If anybody has a question, feel free to use the raise hand feature. All right, Dylan, feel free to unmute and ask.
Hi, Manu. Thank you for the summary. That was really nice. I'm wondering to what extent the working group is planning on interacting or has interacted with the folks in charge of running CEFI, the Climate Ecosystem Fisheries Initiative, just given that they are also trying to address a lot of the similar questions that you're asking here, but maybe with a closer eye towards coastal oceanography, as opposed to maybe more on land coastal infrastructure issues.
So thanks for bringing that up, because I actually don't know of this group. And so I'm going to take notes and follow up by email and make sure that the people that are looking at that are more that the fishery people in the group can connect with them. What is it again? What is it called, the group?
It's the Climate Ecosystems and Fisheries Initiative. It's a NOAA-led effort to develop an array of regional forecasting systems for all US coastlines. And then they're also developing a way to service the data to federal agencies, lay audiences, scientific researchers, that sort of thing. But it's a lot of the same higher level points that you're making here about trying to find end users and understanding their needs it's definitely one of their overarching goals as well. But they're definitely taking more of a fisheries and oceanographic perspective. So if you're also thinking a lot about coastal inundation, yeah, sorry, go ahead. I'll follow up with you over email with some links.
Yeah, and I can hop in here, Ms. Mike, just to say, I don't know if you said this, Manu, that we do have Charlie Stock, who's very much involved in that effort, briefing the working group at one of its upcoming webinars by design to learn more about that effort.
Yeah, I should say that one of the challenges is that this landscape is very broad right now and very unstructured. There's so many different efforts that are happening left and right. And so one of the challenges that we have is to really organize this information in ways that make sense. Yeah.
And Manu, if you want to see everyone, if you're not able to see people right now, if you stop sharing your presentation, you'll be able to see guys online.
Let me do that. Okay.
All right, we have another question from John. If you're done, Dylan.
All set. Thank you.
Thanks for the update, Manu. That was good to see where this working group was at. I know we've had discussions with Matt Newman and several others, probably a year and a half ago now. But I'm curious if you have reached out or are thinking about reaching out to the relatively new community of practices, the coastal coupling community of practice, right? For inland modeling and coastal modeling, that's been around for maybe 3-4 years now, so that's not that new. And there's a recent coastal inundation community of practice.
Oh, there's a new one? An inundation?
Yes, just started. Maybe we had a kickoff meeting 6 months ago.
Okay. Yeah, no, we've been following the first one, the coastal community of coupling of practice, actually until, as Kayla passed away, unfortunately, just last year, which is pretty bad. But so we're aware of their work and we know what they're doing in terms of, but they're more on the second task. They're really about the downscaling and the innovation in downscaling. The one that you just mentioned, inundation, I had no contact, but I can certainly look them up and see what the scope of their work is. And yeah.
Yes, great. And the first one, the coastal coupling community of practice, they're actually doing quite a lot now, even more so than the downscaling part, but at least looking at their sea surface height predictions part, the modeling part, things like that. But it's a large community. Last I looked was 450 to 500 people, practitioners and planners and adaptation specialists, as well as the modelers. So
yes,
I was impressed myself.
Yep. But we were planning in our planning document, actually they are listed as one, we call it boundary organization, that we were going to reach out to. So yes, thank you.
Looks like we have time for one more question. Or if we're done with questions, that's okay too.
You can only infer that we're doing a great job then.
Yeah. And we've got some links in the chat, just a heads up. Dylan put in the fisheries, the NOAA group, and then John put in the coastal inundation community practice. So if you want to click on those before we finish up, go ahead and do so. Otherwise, another thank you to Manu for that great presentation, and thanks everybody for showing up.
Thanks, Manu.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.